Good morning, everyone. My name is Angelica Trento, and I'm a student. I have a bachelor's degree in languages, quindi attualmente ho una laurea triennale. I studied English and Spanish, and I am currently in my last semester as a master's degree student in language sciences in Ca' Foscari University of Venice. Quindi al momento sono al mio ultimo anno di magistrale. I'm doing my internship, quindi il mio tirocinio, at your school. And with today's lesson, I was asked to make you a little more familiar with the United Nations, but in English. As you all know and experience, today's young people face enormous challenges due to globalization, new technologies, climate change. What you might not be aware of, though, because we live in a Western society, is that more than 1/5 of young people in the world are not in employment or education. At least 1 in 4 is affected by violence or armed conflict. Millions of girls become mothers while they are still children, affecting their health, education, and aggravating poverty. I personally think that in order for change to happen in society, it is important that we are all aware of the biggest challenges, sfide, imprese, facing the world, such as poverty, disease, and war, especially us younger generations. We are a vast source of innovation, ideas, solutions. We are the future. And the major global organization dealing with these challenges is precisely the United Nations. Now, 2 or 3 things before we get started. I promise that I'll try to make this lesson as simple and easy to understand as possible, providing you with the translations or definitions of difficult words or difficult parts. If you can't understand something or something is not clear to you for whatever reason, you can comment down below and I'll reply as soon as possible. I'll leave the link also to the script of this lesson, quindi la trascrizione di questa lezione, in the video description, so you can download it if you want, and also the link to the Prezi presentation, so you can check them out yourselves. Okay, now we can start. What is the United Nations? We can define the United Nations as an international organization of independent states containing nearly every country in the world. Its missions are to maintain international peace and promote friendly relations and cooperation among countries in solving economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems around the world. So the UN is not a world government. Instead, it provides an opportunity for the independent states of the world to discuss the global issues which affect them. As far as the origins of the United Nations are concerned, the creation of the UN resulted from a long history to promote international cooperation. 19th century European philosophers like Immanuel Kant proposed a federation of free nations dedicated to protecting perpetual peace. This idea became a reality after the First World War in 1919 with the birth of the League of Nations, that was conceived, quindi era stata concepita, by the President of the United States of America, Wilson, and some of the victorious European powers. The League, though, suffered from two major flaws. Several of the world's most powerful and influential countries were not members, including the USA. And the League required unanimous agreement, quindi accordo unanime, to oppose aggression. So if any member disagreed, the League was powerless to act. Thus, when Germany took military action against fellow members of the League in the late 1930s, the League failed its primary mission to prevent another world war, and soon after, in 1946, it ceased its activities. Much of the League's structure and many of its aims, such as the promotion of international peace, were adopted by its successor, the United Nations. The origins of the United Nations lie in the Second World War. In the midst of the Second World War, leaders of the Allied nations, the countries that opposed the Axis powers, were beginning to envision a new international institution that would ensure global peace and cooperation once the war ended. As you can see, they were US President Franklin Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Stalin. They met several times between 1941 and 1945 to develop this international peacekeeping organization as a formal act of opposition to Germany, Italy, and Japan, so the Axis powers, and with the goal of preventing future wars. In 1945, right before the end of the war and the horrors of the Holocaust, at a San Francisco conference presided by the leaders of the Allied nations, the USA, the UK, and the Soviet Union once again, representatives from 50 countries met to create the Charter of the United Nations. Among them were included, as you can see, 9 European states, 21 North, Central, and South American republics, 7 Middle Eastern states, 5 British Commonwealth nations, 3 Soviet republics, 2 East Asian nations, and 3 African states. Because of the end of colonialism and the breakup of countries such as the USSR and Yugoslavia, the number of independent countries grew, and currently the UN is made up of 193 countries known as member states. Now, what about Italy? Is our country a member state? The 11th article of our Constitution claims, Italy rejects war as an instrument of aggression against the freedom of other peoples and as a means for the settlement of international disputes. Italy agrees on conditions of equality with other states to the limitations of sovereignty that may be necessary to a world order ensuring peace and justice among the nations. Italy promotes and encourages international organizations having such ends. I added a very short video in the presentation where you can actually hear the article in English so you can practice listening. Why is this article relevant to our issue? Well, it expresses the hope of the newborn Italian Republic, which was born in 1946, to become a member of the UN, which had been founded the year before. Italy became an effective member of the UN in 1955 as a defeated nation in the Second World War, And it was the legal framework, quindi il quadro giuridico, no, legislativo, which allowed our nation to join international organizations like the United Nations, but also the European Union. There are only 3 states in the world which are not members of the UN, and they are the Holy See, quindi la Santa Sede, the state of Palestine, and Taiwan. Now, the UN Charter. US President Truman defined the Charter of the United Nations as a constitution, a charter for peace, a solid structure which we can build a better world, on which we can build a better world. It is basically the constitutional and foundational treaty of the UN. Foundational, quindi il trattato, no, fondante di questa organizzazione. It sets forth the rights and obligations of member states, quindi espone, no, enuncia, stabilisce gli obblighi e i diritti degli Stati membri, and establishes its 6 principal organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, quindi il Consiglio di amministrazione fiduciaria, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. We'll focus on the first 2 only because they are the most important, and also there isn't enough time. The UN has 4 main purposes, which are contained in the first article of the UN Charter. Maintaining international peace and security by taking peaceful measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace. Developing friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. The principle of self-determination of peoples is basically that principle that says that people have the right to freely choose their political status with no interference. And then we got achieving international cooperation in solving international problems which could be either economic, social, cultural, humanitarian, and also promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, religion, and then being a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these ends. These purposes are supported by certain principles, basic beliefs contained in the 2nd article of the UN Charter. The principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. All members shall fulfill the obligations assumed. All members shall resolve their international disputes by peaceful means. All members shall refrain, quindi astenersi, from the threat or use of force. All members shall give the United Nations every assistance and shall refrain from giving assistance to any state against which the UN is taking action. And the organization shall ensure that states which are not members act in accordance with these principles. And nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. The Charter provides for the suspension or expulsion of a member state which does not respect the Charter principles, and this has not happened so far, but South Africa suspended itself when the country was under the apartheid system.